Mr. Sherwin Ragunanan is the Deputy CEO of iGovTG, Trinidad and Tobago. He is presently acting CEO, Deputy CEO, and he has an extensive career in IT that spans almost 20 years, both in the private and public sector, and he would have held positions in ICT engineering, project management, business development, ICT infrastructure solutions, and service management and support. And Sherwin is going to speak to us about the TT Travel Pass this morning. So over to you, Sherwin. Muted a bit, yes.
Thanks very much, Junior, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak here at this forum. You hear me clearly, or do I need to speak up?
We hear you quite clear.
All right, thanks very much. All right, so let me just get the presentation started. All right, presentation is in good view?
Yes, it is.
All right,
yeah.
Great. So when I was asked to speak here, I was asked to give a country presentation on this solution. And I think for any experience, an experience is best told through stories. So if we were to go back, and I know a lot of the members and previous speakers would have attested to this. If we go back 2 years, we would all know that we were in a very different space in terms of the way that we did business, the way that we learned in terms of schooling, the way that we interfaced and interacted in the office, the way in which we socialized. And here we are, after the events of COVID-19, facing this global pandemic of which the Caribbean was not left unscathed. We have to adapt. And in adapting, it meant that we needed to do a lot more things very differently than what we would have done before. And Trinidad and Tobago, in keeping with all the protocols prescribed by the health organizations for health and safety and for ensuring that we quickly recover from this, we would have taken various measures. So our first restriction would have started in March 2020, where there was almost a full lockdown there was a full lockdown of the country, and international travel actually ceased for several months. Thereafter, it would have regained some amount of external travel, but via an exemption only situation. So that being said, we would have had incoming flights only for persons who would have been given specific exemptions to enter into the country. And there was a solution that iGovTT, as the national IT company and the implementation arm of the ICT ministry, now the Ministry of Digital Transformation, we would have assisted with the Ministry of National Security in having that solution up. But here we are in 2021, and we recognize that this has fast become a way of life. And we need to get things moving in what everybody is now calling the new normal. So that being said, we started opening up the travel channels, particularly from the air bridge, to allow more persons in. And so that resulted in having a larger influx of persons coming into the country and still being able to manage and monitor the incoming individuals, and so that we can manage the threat associated with the COVID-19 virus. So what were some of the impacts? I mean, I spoke briefly about them. We had changes to the way that employment was done, the workforce. iGovTT in particular, we've moved to a remote workforce environment where on a daily basis, between 85 and 90% of our staff actually working from home. This also changed the way in which we did business and the economic impact. We saw that a lot more businesses and companies started moving and transitioning their solutions and services onto online platforms. And from that, we started seeing increase in revenue streams coming from the digital channels. But the focus of this presentation is how this COVID-19 internationally impacted on our citizens. Because we had students, we had expats, we had travelers who were stranded at a point in time in these foreign territories, dying to get back home. We had businessmen who also needed to conduct their business, some of which could not be done online and needed to be in person. And for that, we needed to expand the way in which we facilitated these things and made that available and possible. So the Treaty Travel Pass is that online portal to help us manage incoming travelers while maintaining an observation of the local health ordinance for COVID-19. So it meant now that we started taking in persons in flux, full flights coming into the country, while still being able to assess and ensure that travelers were either vaccinated, fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated, and when they came, if they were going into state quarantine, if they were going into state-sanctioned quarantine, or whether they would be released to go into their domestic residences. So the provision of an electronic window was obviously the best mechanism to make this happen. The way of the paper would not be able to reach all the persons and all the parties across the globe. Plus, because of the way in which the COVID virus is manifested and interacts with persons, we want to make sure that the incoming travelers have submitted PCR tests so that we could gauge the status of whether they are infected or uninfected or not infected, and how they would be accepted into the country. So phase one started with our air bridge, and it was primarily done through the Caribbean Airline partnership, Caribbean Airline being the local airline. Where we are right now is expanding that into seaports as well as to other airlines that may be coming in. So the objective was to have a shared platform across all these different stakeholders. So Ministry of Health through their Port Health unit, Ministry of National Security through their immigration unit, Ministry of Works and Transport for Airports Authority and other ports, the various airlines, as well as the hoteliers. As I mentioned before, there are state quarantine locations as well as state sanctioned, which would have come back into the availability of rooms should persons be necessary to quarantine. And that needed to be managed as well and classified and categorized, right? Because we expected an influx, a large influx of requests coming in, workflows needed to be put in place so that the approvals are as far as possible automated. So it needed to be easy for the traveler to submit their documents, to get their approvals, easy for the airlines to access those manifests and identify who is going where for Airports Authority as well, Immigration and Port Health, and as well as for how they are then managed going forward and the reporting in the national scheme of things when it comes to reporting around the COVID-19 situation. So when iGovTT was engaged, we immediately went into project management mode and started to assess within the three different parts of the triangle, what is available to us, what we knew, and what we needed to find out. So the cost was well defined. The previous speaker spoke about the AMBA group out of Jamaica being a major facilitator for their solution. And we also engaged with the AMBA group similarly, right? The scope, well, let me move to the time. From when we were engaged together with all the other stakeholders, we were given a 3.5-week timeline to have this solution in place. Now, anybody who would have gone through any public sector ICT deployment knows that even for the smallest of things, 3.5 weeks is a very, very tight timeline to manage. And because of the different persons involved in terms of the myriad of of stakeholders and the changes that occur almost on a daily basis as it relates to how the COVID-19 situation is managed by the various authorities. While at a high level, we understood what the objectives were, as we started to drill down into the details, it started to reveal a lot more dynamic situations. For example, we may have travelers coming from countries who may not be able to establish an English PCR test. How do we accept that? Persons who would be using different tablet devices versus desktop devices, the formats in which they would be able to upload certain documents, the availability of them to provide certain information onto the platform, and their general skill set in being able to maneuver the technology, and how to make those things easier. So we found ourselves with a lot of questions. And as we proceeded along this 3.5-week journey, we had to identify issues, very quickly come to conclusions, and move ahead. So some of the challenges that we face with any project, the larger the stakeholders, the larger the number of stakeholders, it's proportional to the number of interests that you have, the competing priorities, and the increased risk or the increased probability of issues and conflict, right? Because of each one of these persons having different responsibilities in their normal handling of travelers, when it came to the system, which is a brand new system that they are now going to introduce, some of the roles and the responsibilities became unclear for who would be doing what. Their levels of access, the levels of support that they would need to bring to the table, and the level of commitment. As I mentioned, not everything was known up front, and this made it very challenging as well. Understanding as well that this was always going to be a very highly visible project. It meant that we had to be very careful with what we went forward with. Failure did not really have a place in what we needed to do. And for anybody as well who would have done IT deployments in public sector, change management and the introduction of a new IT system is always a challenge. So how did we overcome some of these things? So as I mentioned, we went straight into project management mode. And as far as possible, try to put the framework and structures around how it is we're going to manage this. So we established a base of the key stakeholders, provided regular touch points, regular meetings, regular feedback, constantly refining and updating the roles and responsibilities. So each person will very, very understanding of where their boundaries were around the different, the processes that they owned in the travel pass system. Of course, we had to maintain regular status reports, and escalations will come in almost on a daily basis. This project moved from, in a 3-week period, it moved from managing activities on a daily basis to managing activities on an hourly basis, right? And of course, because of that, the channels of communication had to be very open and very fluid and very dynamic. So telephony, WhatsApp, and all the different informal means of communication became very critical to this project's success. Now, as with any IT project, governance is a key part, right? So under the technical committees, we had the solution group, we had a support group, we had to make sure that as public sector, we still managed and did everything in accordance with the public procurement regulations. And of course, at the end of it, we're going to have a solution that we still need to contract manage for some time to come. So those were the technical aspects. Change management, which were taken up within this project and also individually by each stakeholder, was very key and was actually excised as activities on its own, because we recognized the disruption that this was going to cause. And of course, sitting above it, we had our executive steering committee. So some of the success factors that really made this come to life: communication. There was open and fluid communication between all parties. There was the communication was not hierarchical, but more matrix type. so that we had the chief medical officer speaking to technical professional resources. We had ministers involved in making decisions and bringing it back to key stakeholders, and it may even be a low-level technical officer, persons who were doing process maps, people who were dealing with the contracting, right? Because of all those things and the way that it came together, commitment around the process and around the project was quickly gained. And that helped move things along very swiftly. Because we had the commitment, timely decisions were coming. So an escalation that took place at 4 o'clock this afternoon, if it didn't have a decision this afternoon, there was a decision that would have been made before 9 a.m. the following day. So there were very timely activities and actions in terms of moving this ahead. The change management, as I mentioned, was a key aspect, and because it was excised, and because we had the commitment, we saw people making a lot more moves towards actually adopting, buying in, playing with the system, observing errors, bringing it to the fore so that it could quickly be amended and adopted, so that at the end of the day, the stakeholders had a robust platform. They were comfortable with what was being done. The solution persons were very happy and pleased around the security aspects of it, as well as the citizens who needed to use it. They would have had an experience that was amenable and accommodating to them. And I think above all of it, all of these things were really possible because of a strong and consistent executive champion. And I don't think that a lot of people take stock of how important having that individual is. In this case, while we would have had all these different stakeholders, Ministry of Health, Airports Authority, Ministry of National Security, Immigration, etc., this was actually led by the Office of the Prime Minister. Minister Stuart Young, who is a minister in the ministry, on the Office of the Prime Minister, he was the executive champion. And he was able to bolster the support of his other ministers and of the chief officers in these other agencies to make sure that things happen. He was even so much on the ground in terms of making site visits on a daily basis, site visits sometime on the weekend, speaking to staff, speaking to general users of the system, so that everybody was committed and driving towards getting this done. And he as well was there as the executive champion, clearing any roadblocks that would have been present. So at the end of the day, this is just at a very high level solution overview. We had 4 pillars on which we stood and under which the platform was launched. So in the 3 weeks' time that we had to do this, there is no way that we would have been able to procure and deploy infrastructure in the traditional means. So we had to look at cloud technology, right? It gave us a flexible, reliable, and scalable solution, the scalable infrastructure solution that was necessary to get this up. That being said, security maintained a paramount position in all the technical discussions, right? We were capturing health information from individuals and other key sensitive information from citizens and travelers that would be coming in. So security was very paramount. Together with the in-house, and I'm saying in-house from the government perspective, the in-house resources, together with the contractor, we had to make sure that we had tight SLAs and that the contract management that was done for the implementation and also for the support was properly in place and well managed. And at the end of the day, so in the solution group, in the stakeholder group, everybody would have realized that the key stakeholder, which made up probably the 95% of the bulk, is really the travelers. But to engage with every traveler and get their feedback and have them do testing, etc., would not have facilitated the timelines and would have been very impractical as well. So we had to set up some robust support mechanisms for the travelers and the persons that would be interfacing and interacting with the system, so that their experience becomes easier and it becomes facilitative rather than restrictive. So we in iGovTT, the TT Connect group which deals with citizen services. We, during the COVID situation, in fact, prior to the COVID situation, we would have launched our live chat service, live chat and chatbot services. So at the end of the day, on the Travel Pass site, should anybody encounter issues while there is an FAQ, we also had, via the TT Connect channel, we had international and local numbers, toll-free numbers that are available for travelers to call in should they have issues, as well as through the GovChat facility for travelers to interface with either a live agent or with the chatbot service to get the responsiveness that they need. Of course, at the end of the day, if they don't have, from the chatbot side, if they didn't get the responses that they needed, they could have always logged a ticket and somebody from the TT Connect group would have gotten back to them. And this has worked out extremely well. The feedback that we received because of this arm of the support really lent itself to a good experience for persons using the Travel Pass and having to enter into the country. And so TT Travel Pass went live on the 17th of July. So we would have just hit the 2-month mark in terms of having the solution up and running. And thus far, we've been able to process over 15,000 travelers. And this is only via the air bridge, particularly on the Caribbean Airlines, carrier. So it does show and demonstrate how these digital platforms could really reach persons, be facilitative, and change the way in which we do business and accommodate our citizens and accommodate the way that we need to move forward so that we don't stymie ourselves, our economies, and how we move forward. All right? And with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sherwin. This was again another excellent presentation, and it's quite a lot that happened within 3.5 weeks. I just want to note a couple of things that you said that I think, and again, each presentation brings a different dimension of problem solving. I mean, you focus a lot on defining the process from the start. So you didn't detail, went through the process. Even before we started to talk about technology, we went into the process. Significant research went into the thinking. Scale was inherent in the design. Those are fundamental things. A well-defined project plan and scope was established. And in the midst, and all this happened in the midst of a crisis situation. We're talking about 3.5 weeks. Okay,
correct.
All these things, proper methodologies were implemented, well-defined risk assessment and critical assumptions were made, with change management in mind. I just have one question for you, Sherwin,
sure.
to add to everything that you said. Couldn't find a question because the presentation was very complete. But essentially, what linkages or integration points do you see the TT Travel Pass has with new or evolving systems? I know the cloud technologies will leverage a lot and extensively. So I'm sure you would have thought about other integration points or other evolving systems that eventually the TT Pass, Travel Pass can probably evolve into or support other use cases.
So, and that's a part that we're still trying to get into, because during this COVID-19 crisis, while TT Travel Pass was one of the solutions that would have come out, in several other ministries and agencies, they also started developing their systems and services. So for example, our Ministry of Health started putting a lot of trust into digitization of their vaccination system. So the integration into that solution would now also make it easier for persons who may be exiting and re-entering the country, seeing that they would have had now these digital records that we could validate against. So those are some of the points, plus together with the seaports, bookings, etc., even in the airports as well, booking information, how we take the information that would be submitted via passports to now integrate with the vaccination system, so that it really becomes complete and it takes some of the burden and ownership from the customer and moves it now into the digital system. So there's a level of confidence that the information that we're looking at and that we're processing we could stand by it because it has been validated already and sits in a digital database that is easy to access and look at it from an end-to-end process. So those are some of the points that we're looking at, and we're still evolving in those regards.
Yeah, and I like what you said here. Essentially, you're building a platform, not an app.
Correct.
You're building a platform it can scale, and you have a vision, you have plans to integrate other use cases, and have a growing platform ecosystem. Yep. Really good, excellent presentation. Thanks a lot, Sherwin.